Brandon Staley, the first-year head coach for the Los Angeles Chargers, is a defensive mastermind. He has proven in his past 10 years that he's a defensive genius, starting with 10 years of differentiated college coaching, including terms as a defensive coordinator. Staley then moved into the NFL coaching stage, starting in 2017 with the Chicago Bears as the outside linebacker coach. In 2019, he was hired by the Denver Broncos to be their outside linebacker coach, reuniting with Vic Fangio, a defensive guru himself who has inspired and influenced many of the football world's best defensive coaches. After 1 year in Denver, Staley moved to Los Angeles to be the defensive coordinator, a major step up for him and the crucial moment of his career. With the Rams, Staley developed his own concepts of defense, mixing his own ideas of defensive line with influence ideas on how the secondary should work. I'll briefly explain how the Staley system worked in a second, but to prove his success, the Rams were first in total points and yards allowed, dominating the NFL and becoming the undisputed number one defense in the league. His success wasn't unnoticed, and the Los Angeles Chargers promptly hired him after the 2020 season to be their head coach of the future, building off the surprise success of Justin Herbert and the Chargers offense. That brings us to today, where we're watching the final games of Staley's first season as the head coach, poised to make the playoffs and perhaps stay longer than wildcard weekend. With a little bit of understanding who Staley is, that brings the question of the Chargers defense. Seeing as he had so much success with the Rams in 2020, how have the 2021 Chargers blended with the dominating and quite unorthodox schemes that Brandon Staley brings to the table? This is what we will look at in today's episode of Today with Tyler. First, let me briefly explain how Staley's system is meant to work, exemplified by the 2020 Rams. In an NFL that relies heavily on the pass attack and big-armed quarterbacks to produce chunk plays and shoot out opponents, having a too-high safety shell is extremely important to the success of a defense against the pass. By having two safeties playing deep zones rather than one, corners are given less pressure to maintain perfect coverage, and help can be supplied up top on nearly any route which an offense can throw at defense. When there is one safety, that free safety must make a decision at some point which route to cover if multiple receivers run deep, which is also common in the league today. Now, you may ask why any defense would ever only allow one high safety rather than two, if the benefits are proven in the passing game of having two deep safeties. The answer is the run game. Although today's league isn't utilizing the run quite the same, and teams like the Chiefs and Bills are allowing their run games to slack in favor of a dynamic passing game, there are still many teams that are run-first offenses and insist on pounding the ground with their backs until defenses finally make an adjustment. The run game is ideally defended by having as many players a defense can fit inside the box without giving up the pass attack completely. And since no defense knows which type of play is coming for certain, there's only one way to save yourself from the run: compromise. Formations with single high safeties allow for an extra man in the box, outgapping an offense and ensuring that a phenomenal play by blockers would be necessary to succeed with a run. The challenge for defensive coordinators and head coaches today lies in balancing outgapping and protecting deep zones from the pass, and this is where coaches like Staley shine. Staley understands the importance of protecting the deep zones, and preferred to stop the pass attack while formulating his own ideas on how to stop the run. His solution is the Staley system. Rather than having a four-man rush with two defensive ends and two defensive tackles on the line, or even a typical three-man rush with two ends and a nose tackle, the two primary base looks for modern defenses, Staley brought back an obsolete front in order to scheme the perfect compromise. Staley lines up his linemen in what is known as a tight front, which has a nose tackle directly in front of the center and two defensive ends positioned just inside the tackles in what is called the 4-eye technique. The purpose of the tight front is to cause chaos for the offensive line, which has to attempt to get leverage on these defensive linemen who are in probably the most awkward position for the offense. The front is especially offensive against zone run schemes, which I will explain in a later episode in the interest of time and simplicity, but the most important thing to know is the importance of leverage in the run zone game. If the offensive line can't get leverage, they can't move to the second level of the defense, which consists of the linebackers, and thus the play is unlikely to go much farther than 3 yards. All three linemen are in the worst position to block for the offense, which allows for the linebackers and even safeties not only to be left unblocked, but to stop the running back by filling gaps. Added to the genius of the tight front is the creativity of Staley, who was willing to think outside of the box once again and create an entirely new system of working the tight front. In football, defenses play either what's called a one-gap defense or two-gap defense. Two-gap defenses are pretty much extinct, since they truly can't keep up with the modern offense, but they relied on reading and reacting to the play as it developed, and changing the scheme during the play to counter it. One-gap defenses tell defenders to shoot through a specific gap, determined before the play, and primarily aim to fill certain gaps and force running backs to cut back into an area where the defense has the most support from linebackers and other box defenders. Brandon Staley, though, decided he didn't like either. A two-gap system simply wouldn't work, and the one-gap system wasn't powerful enough at outgapping defenses while keeping two high safeties. His solution is what he calls the 1.5 gap system, an advanced blend of both systems. Rather than shooting through a gap, defenders are told to occupy a gap, but to read the running back and be responsible for not only the gap they occupy, but the one on the other side of them. By refusing to shoot through the gaps, which is not only expected but a function of the one-gap system, the running back has to choose a gap he thinks is open without certainty, which usually causes the back to falter in his stride, and that split-second hesitation is enough time for not only the line to react, but for the second and third level to react as well, which is why the system is so effective. When you combine the inability for the offense to block the second level with the gifted time for the second level to fill the remaining gaps in the line, there's virtually nowhere for the running back to actually go. Having safeties like John Johnson III in the Rams system in 2020, who were not anything special physically, but were willing to go make a tackle, and the third level is able to get involved and stop the run in the case that the linebacker on the second level does get blocked. Just with the simple alignment of the tight front, Staley's 1.5 gap system and the run game is immediately shut down. The most important part of the genius of scheming in the Staley box is the personnel required to run the tight front 1.5 gap system is only 7, leaving a second safety to patrol the half the field. The run game is shut down through fronts and formations, while the pass game is also crushed with the two deep safeties. Brandon Staley created a system that can stop both the pass and the run simultaneously, and its dramatic effects were undeniable in 2020. The expectation was that Staley would bring this system to the Chargers, and that the Chargers defense would take unbelievable steps forward. But for anyone who has watched a Chargers game this year, it clearly isn't the case. But why? Brandon Staley's system is special in many ways, but one of the more underappreciated features is that it doesn't require a specific personnel group, like the Legion of Boom, Saxonville, the Patriots with Patrick Chung, and other famous defensive giants of years past, which always failed elsewhere since they were built around specific skill sets and weren't easily replicable. Although it helped Staley to have players like Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey, they weren't exactly necessary. With that feature, there was even more expectation that the Chargers would see dramatic improvements, and it's not like their defense is as hopeless as others in the NFL. We haven't seen the immediate effects many predicted, and this is due to a few factors in the Chargers era of Staley's defensive masterpiece. First, the defensive line for the Chargers can often seem simply dominated. Staley kept his tight front and still dials up blitzes too, but the Chargers line was even crushed consistently by the Texans of all teams, the then 3-win Houston Texans. That's straight up embarrassing for any team, and since their offensive line is atrocious with the exception of Laramie Tunsil, who also was injured during that game, by getting dominated so frequently, the whole tight front idea is shot, and it's just a basic 3-4 defense. It certainly doesn't help that the third level isn't quite as aggressive as the Rams last year, and you can often see a safety floating outside of the bunch of defenders following the running back. Don't worry, Chargers fans, that isn't Derwin James though. When the run comes to his side, he certainly gets in on the action. He is one of those safeties who is built perfectly for the Staley system. But one of the benefits of Staley's system was the hesitation of the back, which allowed safeties and linebackers to come unblocked and make a stop. And since there's an unwillingness of the other safeties that aren't named Derwin James to make that stop, and linebackers are finding themselves blocked much more since the defensive line is getting crushed. Even when the defensive line doesn't get crushed, they still aren't used to that 1.5 gap play style and frequently don't cover more than just their primary gap. Overall, in terms of the Staley system, the Chargers era has fallen short of expectation due to the lack of execution. Those issues are very fixable though, and I would give it a year, or at worst even 2, until Staley has enough time to teach the system to his new roster, and for the players to learn the finesse it takes to play under Brandon Staley. In the meantime, however, they're going to the playoffs while giving up 140.3 rushing yards per game, which ranks 29th in the NFL, the 3rd worst, and where they're also allowing for 4.7 yards per attempt. These numbers are astonishingly bad, especially for a Staley unit, but for now I'll chalk it up to it being the first year in a wildly new system and a lack of usable personnel in the trenches. Another problem I caught while analyzing the Staley system, however, was an apparent weakness in the secondary. I wasn't aiming to find weaknesses in the secondary, I was mostly looking on why the run game was really successful against the Chargers, but here we are. While they aren't horrible, ranked 12th in passing yards allowed per game at 223.5, they're still below average in many areas, including being 21st in pass yards per attempt at 6.8 this year, and 20th in average QB rating allowed per game, allowing an average rating of 92.5. Not quite as bad as their horrifying rush defense, but it's still a major issue that Staley needs to work out, especially since he has already given them the tactical advantage of 2 safeties most of the time. I know Staley is trying to work by scheming up a good system, but at some point, you do need a workable roster to get an effective defense. Even if you're a genius like Brandon Staley, you do need the depth and the players to effectually execute your defensive scheme. After analysis, it's obvious that Staley hasn't had as much of an impact in Los Angeles at all, at least defensively, and while they have a good record, they're relying heavily on their offense, and when that even falters for a second, as we saw with the Texans game, the Chargers go right back to 2020. I have faith that Staley can turn this unfortunate crew around, and this year's run in the playoffs will act more as crucial experience than a true Super Bowl run. And with a good draft, which the Chargers have really been nailing recently, the NFL could soon quiver at the mention of the Chargers, and the Chiefs may even find their division stranglehold at risk. Thank you for listening, and thank you to Pranay, my friend, for giving me the inspiration for this video, and Billy Stevens, who helped me understand how Staley's system worked in 2020. A link to his channel will be left in the description.